The great hall of Ironvale Keep had never been so crowded. Wolves from every corner of the kingdom of Valdris had traveled for days to witness the ceremony. Nobles stood in the front rows dressed in rich cloaks and shining jewelry. Warriors lined the stone walls with straight backs and serious faces. Common wolves filled the back of the hall, whispering with excitement. Everyone had come for the same reason. They wanted to see their king claim his mate. It was a rare moment in the history of the kingdom. When an alpha king found his true mate, it was not only a personal matter. It was an event that affected the entire realm. A queen would soon stand beside the throne. The hall smelled of burning torches and polished stone. The ceiling rose high above them, supported by thick pillars carved with ancient wolf symbols. At the far end of the room stood the obsidian throne, dark and powerful, raised on a wide platform. And standing at the end of the crimson carpet that led toward it was Saren Voss. Saren stood very still. She kept her hands folded in front of her to hide the small tremble in her fingers. The silver gown she wore shimmered softly in the torchlight. It had been provided by the palace servants earlier that morning. The silk fabric felt strange against her skin. She had never worn anything so beautiful before. Saren came from Thornwood Pack, a small border pack that lived deep in the forests near the edge of the kingdom. Their home was quiet and simple. The wolves there hunted, farmed, and lived far from the politics of the royal court. Standing in Ironvale Keep felt like standing in another world. Her eyes slowly lifted toward the throne. 3 months ago she had seen the king for the first time. He had come to Thornwood during a border dispute between two neighboring packs. Saren had been helping her brother when the royal guards arrived. The moment King Cale Ventress walked into the meeting hall, the entire room had fallen silent. He had been tall and imposing, his presence filling the space with quiet authority. Saren had looked up from across the crowded room. And their eyes had met. In that single moment, something powerful had snapped into place inside her chest. The mate bond. It had felt like a thread of burning light connecting their souls together. Her wolf had stirred instantly with recognition. For one breathless second, Saren had seen something in the king's pale blue eyes. Recognition. A flash of something deep and powerful. Then he had turned away. As if nothing had happened. For the next 3 months, the king had acted as though she did not exist. And now she stood in his hall waiting for him to claim her. The murmuring voices in the crowd slowly faded as movement began near the throne. King Cale Ventress rose. Even among wolves he was enormous. His shoulders were broad and strong beneath his dark clothing. Pale hair brushed the collar of his coat, and his sharp features looked carved from stone. His eyes were the color of a winter sky before a storm. Cold, beautiful, terrifying. The entire hall watched as he stepped down from the raised platform and began walking toward Saren. His boots echoed against the stone floor. Each step felt heavy with power. When he finally stopped before her, he stood only a few feet away. Up close, Saren noticed something strange. He felt cold. Every wolf knew that alphas ran warm with strength and power. But standing near Cale felt like standing beside frost. Saren Voss, he said. His deep voice carried easily across the hall. Omega of Thornwood Pack. Saren bowed her head respectfully. Yes, your majesty. For a moment, silence hung between them. Then Cale straightened slightly and looked out across the gathered crowd. The bond between us has been confirmed by the seers of Valdris, he said. The crowd leaned forward, waiting for the rest of his words. Saren's heart beat faster. This was the moment. But Cale's voice remained calm and distant. However, after careful consideration, I have determined that this bond does not serve the interests of my kingdom. The words struck the air like a sudden storm. Confusion rippled through the hall. Saren slowly looked up at him. His face remained hard. A king requires a queen of noble blood, Cale continued. A mate of political value and powerful lineage. His jaw tightened slightly. You are none of these things. Gasps spread through the crowd. Whispers began to rise from every corner of the hall. A woman near the front laughed softly. Saren felt hundreds of eyes watching her. Watching to see her break. Cale's voice rose again. Therefore, before the witnesses gathered here today, I formally reject the mate bond between us. You are released from any claim to my name, my throne, and my pack. The words echoed through the hall. Saren stared at him. Most Omegas would have collapsed. Most would have begged. The pain of rejection from a true mate was supposed to break the soul. But Saren was not looking at his face. She was looking at something else. The threads. They floated around every living soul like strands of glowing light. Saren had seen them her entire life. The golden thread between her and Cale still burned brightly. It pulsed with energy. It screamed that what was happening was wrong. Then she saw something darker. Wrapped tightly around the king's heart was a chain of shadow. Black tendrils twisted like poison around his soul. Saren felt a wave of sickness. A curse. He wasn't rejecting her because he wanted to. Something was forcing him. Her eyes followed the threads further. And there, hidden within the shifting strands of fate, Saren saw another future. A future where she stayed. Where she fought the rejection. And in that future she died. The choice became clear. Saren lifted her chin. I accept your rejection, your majesty. Her voice was calm. Quiet. But it carried through the entire hall. The silence that followed was absolute. For several seconds no one moved. No wolf had ever accepted rejection from a true mate. Kale stared at her. Shock broke through his cold expression. You accept? He said slowly. Yes. Saren turned her back on the king. I release any claim to your name, your throne, and your pack. Then she began walking toward the massive doors at the end of the hall. The reaction was immediate. A wave of dominance exploded from the king. The force slammed into the crowd like a storm. Wolves cried out and dropped to their knees. Windows shattered along the stone walls. Cracks spread across the marble floor beneath Kale's feet. Stop. His voice was deeper now. Rougher. Barely human. Saren staggered slightly from the pressure but did not fall. 10 steps. 5. You will not leave this hall. The command struck her like a physical blow. But Saren kept walking. The bond no longer bound her. She reached the doors and pushed them open. Cold night air rushed inside. Without looking back, Saren stepped out into the darkness. Behind her, the Alpha King's furious roar shook the walls of Ironvale Keep. The king's secret. Saren ran. The cold night air rushed against her face as she hurried down the stone path that led away from the great hall. Behind her, the sounds of chaos still echoed through Ironvale Keep. Guards were shouting. Wolves were growling in confusion. Somewhere deep inside the castle, the king's furious roar continued to shake the walls. But Saren did not stop. Her silver gown caught against rough stones as she moved quickly through the courtyard. The long fabric tore slightly at the hem, but she barely noticed. All she could think about was getting away. Her chest felt tight. Even though she had accepted the rejection, the bond between her and Kale still throbbed like a wound deep inside her heart. Her wolf paced restlessly beneath her skin, confused and grieving. The stables stood at the edge of the castle grounds, quiet and dark. Saren pushed the wooden door open and stepped inside. The smell of hay and horses filled the air. Lantern light flickered softly along the rows of stalls. Most of the stable workers had left to watch the ceremony, leaving the building nearly empty. Good. Saren hurried to the far stall. A brown mare lifted her head and gave a soft whinny when she saw her. Easy, Mira, Saren whispered. She stroked the horse's neck gently. Mira had been assigned to Saren earlier that evening in case the new queen wished to ride through the royal gardens. Now the horse would serve a very different purpose. Saren quickly grabbed the saddle and fastened the straps with shaking hands. We just need to get past the gates, she murmured. Then we'll be safe. Her fingers moved quickly over the leather buckles. Every moment she expected guards to burst through the stable doors. But the silence remained. Saren pulled herself onto the saddle and turned Mira toward the open stable entrance. She had almost reached the doorway when a voice spoke behind her. Going somewhere? Saren froze. Slowly she turned her head. A tall man leaned against the wooden frame of the doorway, blocking the exit. His arms were folded across his chest, and a faint smile rested on his lips. Saren recognized him immediately. Lord Corvus, she said quietly. The man stepped forward into the lantern light. He looked very much like the king. His hair was the same pale color, and his sharp features carried the same noble bloodline. But where Kale's face was cold and distant, Corvus wore a constant expression of amusement. His golden eyes studied Saren carefully. What a fascinating moment that was, he said. I must admit, little Omega, you surprised me. Saren held the reins tightly. What do you want? Corvus walked slowly around the horse, his boots crunching softly on the straw-covered floor. I simply wish to see the woman who just changed the future of the kingdom. Saren frowned. What do you mean? Corvus chuckled quietly. Did my nephew not tell you? Saren felt unease rise in her chest. Tell me what? Corvus stopped beside the horse and looked up at her. The king is dying. Saren stared at him. What? For years now, Corvus continued calmly. A rather unfortunate curse placed upon him by his own father. Saren's mind raced. The coldness she had felt when Kale stood near her. The dark chain wrapped around his heart. The pieces began to fit together. "What kind of curse?" she asked. "A freezing curse," Corvus said. "It slowly spreads through his body, turning warmth into ice. Eventually his heart will stop completely." Saren felt her stomach tighten. Corvus leaned closer. "You saw how cold he felt, didn't you?" Saren said nothing. "That curse has been eating him alive for years," Corvus continued. "His wolf grows weaker each month." Saren's grip on the reins tightened. "Why are you telling me this?" Corvus's smile widened. "Because your decision tonight has been very helpful to me." Saren's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean?" Corvus tilted his head slightly. "You were his last chance." Saren felt a chill run down her spine. "What?" "The bond between true mates can stabilize a wolf that is losing control," Corvus explained. "You might have slowed the curse. Perhaps even saved him." His eyes gleamed with satisfaction. "But now that you accepted the rejection, his wolf will have nothing to anchor it." Saren's heart pounded. "He will lose control," Corvus said softly. "Within a month, the curse will finish its work." Saren suddenly understood. "You planned this," she whispered. Corvus only shrugged. "I encouraged my nephew to see reason. A king must always think of the kingdom first." Saren felt anger rise inside her chest. "You want the throne." Corvus's smile did not fade. "When Kale dies, someone must rule. As his uncle, I will serve as regent until the council chooses a new king." Saren's mind raced. Everything had been arranged. The rejection. The humiliation. The curse. Corvus stepped back from the horse. "Now run along," he said calmly. "You have done exactly what I needed." Saren stared at him. "You're letting me leave?" "Of course," Corvus replied. "It benefits my plan if you disappear." His golden eyes glimmered. "The king will die much faster without you nearby." Saren's jaw tightened. Without another word, she urged Mira forward. The mare galloped out of the stables and across the castle yard. Within moments, the dark forest path stretched ahead of them. The wind rushed through Saren's hair as the horse ran deeper into the trees. Branches swayed overhead. Moonlight filtered through the leaves. For a moment, Saren allowed herself to hope she might escape. Then Mira suddenly stopped. The horse reared violently. Saren grabbed the reins to keep from falling. "What is it?" she whispered. A deep growl answered her. From the shadows between the trees, a massive wolf stepped forward. The creature was enormous. Its fur was black as midnight, and its eyes burned with bright blue fire. Saren's breath caught. The king. The wolf moved slowly toward her. Each step was powerful and controlled. Mira trembled beneath Saren. "Your Majesty," Saren whispered. The wolf snarled. Then its body began to change. Bones shifted. Fur disappeared. Within seconds, King Kale stood before her, breathing heavily. His body trembled slightly as he looked up at her. "You cannot leave," he said hoarsely. Saren frowned. "You rejected me." "I know." His voice sounded strained. "My wolf refuses to accept it." Saren stared at him. "If you leave the kingdom," Kale continued, "my wolf will hunt you. That sounds like your problem." "I wish it were." Kale closed his eyes briefly. "I rejected you to protect you." Saren crossed her arms. "Protect me from what?" "The curse," he said quietly. "My wolf is losing control. Anyone close to me becomes a target of its rage." Saren studied his face. "And now?" "My wolf believes you still belong with us," Kale admitted. His voice dropped. "I cannot force it to let you go." Saren sighed. "So what do you want from me?" Kale met her gaze. "Stay." Saren blinked. "Stay in the castle as my guest. Not as my mate. Not as my queen." He paused. "But if you try to leave, my wolf will chase you." Saren thought for a moment. Then she nodded slowly. "Fine." Kale looked surprised. "But I have conditions," Saren said. "What conditions?" "You will tell me the truth about your curse," she said firmly. "Everything." Kale studied her carefully. Finally he nodded. "Agreed." Saren shifted slightly in the saddle. "And if I find a way to leave safely, you will let me go." Kale hesitated. Then he nodded again. "Agreed." He turned toward the distant lights of the castle. "One more thing," he said quietly. Saren waited. "Do not try to save me." Saren frowned. Kale's voice grew colder. "Whatever you learn about the curse, do not sacrifice yourself to break it." He looked back at her. "I am already a dying man." Without another word, he began walking back toward Ironvale Keep. Saren sat quietly on her horse, watching him disappear into the trees. Then she turned Mira around and followed him back to the castle. The night felt colder than before. And Saren knew she had just stepped into something far more dangerous than a broken mate bond. Secrets inside the castle. The chamber they gave Saren was larger than the entire house she had grown up in. Soft blue curtains hung from tall windows that looked over the castle gardens. A wide bed stood in the center of the room, covered with thick blankets and velvet pillows. A fire burned gently in the stone fireplace, warming the quiet space. Everything was beautiful. Everything was comfortable. And yet Saren felt trapped. She stood near the window and looked out over the moonlit courtyard below. Guards walked slowly along the walls, their armor glinting under torchlight. The tall gates of Ironvale Keep stood closed, separating the castle from the forest beyond. Freedom felt very far away. 3 days had passed since the night of the rejection ceremony. 3 days since she had returned to the castle with the king. During that time, Saren had seen almost no one. Servants brought meals and left quickly without speaking. Guards stood outside her door at all hours. No one answered her questions. The castle felt quiet, but it was the kind of quiet that hid secrets. Saren sighed and stepped away from the window. Her thoughts kept returning to the moment she had seen the threads wrapped around Kale's heart. The dark chains of magic had been stronger than anything she had ever witnessed before. The curse was real, and it was killing him. A knock on the door pulled Saren from her thoughts. "Enter," she said. The door opened slowly. A young woman stepped inside carrying a wooden tray filled with food. She had copper-colored hair tied into a loose braid and freckles scattered across her cheeks. Her green eyes looked curious but not afraid. She set the tray carefully on a small table. "Good evening, my lady," she said politely. "My name is Isolde. His Majesty asked me to attend to you." Saren studied her. Unlike the other servants, this girl did not avoid her gaze. "You're not afraid of me?" Saren asked. Isolde hesitated for a moment before answering. "Some of the servants are," she admitted. "Why?" The maid shifted slightly. "They say strange things about you." Saren raised an eyebrow. "What kind of things?" Isolde lowered her voice. "They say you must be a witch." Saren blinked. "A witch?" Isolde nodded. "They say you resisted the king's command during the ceremony. No one has ever done that before." Saren gave a small smile. "I'm not a witch." Isolde looked relieved but still curious. "Then how did you walk away from him?" she asked. Saren did not answer. Instead she sat down and began eating the warm stew that had been placed before her. The food tasted rich and comforting, but her mind was still busy with questions. The door suddenly burst open. The force of it made Isolde jump in surprise. A tall woman stepped into the room without waiting for permission. Her silver blonde hair was styled carefully on top of her head, and her crimson gown flowed behind her like fire. Her pale blue eyes were sharp and filled with anger. Saren recognized her immediately. Queen Thessal, the king's mother. The queen walked across the room with long, confident steps. "So," she said coldly, "you are the Omega who humiliated my son before the entire kingdom." Saren slowly stood. "Your Grace." Thessal looked Saren up and down with open disapproval. "I expected more from the woman fate chose for my son," she said. "Instead I find a girl who accepts rejection like it means nothing." Saren remained calm. "With respect, Your Grace, your son rejected me first." The queen's eyes narrowed. "And you should have fought him." Saren crossed her arms. "Why?" "Because that is what mates do," Thessal replied sharply. "You should have refused. You should have forced him to face the bond." Saren held her gaze. Would that have saved him? For a moment the queen looked surprised. Then her expression hardened again. "You know about the curse?" Saren nodded slowly. "I saw it." Thessal turned slightly away and walked toward the window. "The curse was placed by his father," she said quietly. Saren listened carefully. "Years ago the old king believed I had betrayed him," Thessal continued. "He demanded that Kale execute me for treason." Saren's eyes widened. "And Kale refused?" "Yes," Thessal said. "My son chose his mother over his king." She looked back at Saren. "So his father cursed him with his dying breath." Saren felt a chill move through her body. "What kind of curse?" "One that freezes him from the inside out," the queen said. Saren remembered the unnatural cold she had felt standing near Kale. "The frost spreads slowly through his body," Thessal continued. "One day it will reach his heart." Saren spoke quietly. "I might be able to help." The queen stared at her. "The greatest healers in Valdris have already tried," Thessal said. None of them succeeded. Saren opened her mouth to reply. But sudden shouting echoed from somewhere in the castle. Heavy footsteps rushed through the hallway outside. The door burst open again. A guard stood in the doorway breathing hard. Your Grace, he said urgently. The king has collapsed in the throne room. Thessal's face went pale. Saren moved first. She rushed past the guard and ran through the corridor. Servants and soldiers hurried through the castle halls, their voices filled with fear. Saren reached the throne room and pushed through the large doors. A crowd had gathered around the base of the obsidian throne. Saren forced her way through them. Cale lay on the stone floor. His skin looked pale as frost. Thin crystals of ice had begun spreading across his throat and chest. His breath came in weak, shallow gasps. Healers knelt beside him, arguing in panic. His temperature is dropping too fast, one shouted. Fire won't help, another replied. The curse consumes heat. Saren dropped to her knees beside him. Up close, the frost looked even worse. The dark chains around his heart had grown thicker. Without thinking, Saren grabbed his hand. The cold shocked her immediately. But beneath the ice, she felt the familiar thread connecting their souls. His wolf howled weakly through the bond. Saren closed her eyes. For the first time in her life, she reached out toward the threads. Her mother had always warned her never to touch them. But now there was no choice. Saren grasped the golden thread between them. And she pulled. Warmth rushed through her body like flowing fire. The energy moved down her arm and into Cale's frozen hand. The frost on his chest stopped spreading. His next breath came easier. Suddenly his eyes opened. They glowed gold with the presence of his wolf. Mate, he growled weakly. His hand moved suddenly, gripping the back of Saren's neck. He pulled her closer until their foreheads touched. You shouldn't have done that, he whispered. Saren struggled to breathe. I couldn't let you die. Cale studied her face. Whatever you just did, he said slowly, our bond is stronger now. Saren felt dizzy from the effort. Warmth returned slowly to Cale's skin. After several minutes, the healers and guards quietly left the room. Only Saren and Cale remained beside the throne. Cale leaned back against the stone platform. I suppose you deserve the truth, he said. Saren nodded. The curse responds to emotional connection, Cale explained. The closer someone gets to me, the faster it spreads. Saren frowned. So when the mate bond appeared. I knew I had to reject you, Cale finished. His voice sounded tired. If I had accepted you, the curse would have killed you as well. Saren looked down at their joined hands. And now? Cale gave a quiet laugh. Now you've tied our lives together even tighter. Saren met his eyes. Then we find another way to break the curse. Cale shook his head slightly. You shouldn't promise things you can't control. Saren's voice was calm. I see the threads of fate, Cale. He stared at her. Your death is not the only future. For the first time since she had met him, hope flickered in the king's eyes. And Saren knew their fight had only just begun. The bond that should not exist. The nights in Ironvale Keep became a quiet routine. Every evening, after the castle halls had grown silent and the servants had finished their duties, Saren walked through the dim corridors toward the king's private study. The guards outside the door no longer stopped her. After the night she had saved the king's life, her presence in the royal chambers had become something no one questioned openly. Inside the study, a fire always burned in the large stone hearth. Cale usually stood near the tall window that overlooked the dark forest beyond the castle walls. The moonlight often cast pale silver across the room, mixing with the warm glow of the fire. Saren would step inside quietly. And the king would turn to face her. At first, their meetings had been strictly about the danger surrounding the throne. They spoke about Corvus. They spoke about the curse. They spoke about the strange events happening inside the castle. Cale had begun investigating his uncle carefully. He had ordered trusted guards to watch Corvus's movements. But the man was clever. He never left evidence behind. Every conversation ended with more questions than answers. Yet something else had begun to change between them. Each night, Cale looked a little stronger. The unnatural frost that had once clung to his skin had begun to fade. His breathing was steadier. His movements carried more strength. Saren noticed it immediately. She also noticed something else. Every time they sat close together, warmth seemed to flow between them through the invisible bond connecting their souls. At first Saren believed it was only her imagination. But the pattern became impossible to ignore. Whenever Cale touched her, his strength improved. And whenever he stepped away from her, the cold slowly returned. One evening Saren sat across from him at the large wooden desk while he studied a stack of documents. You're getting stronger, she said quietly. Kale glanced up. You noticed? Saren nodded. The frost is retreating. Kale leaned back in his chair. That's because of you. Saren frowned. What do you mean? Kale reached across the desk and gently took her hand. The moment their skin touched, Saren felt the familiar warmth pass through the bond. You've been feeding me energy, Kale said calmly. Saren blinked in surprise. I didn't realize I was doing it. You weren't doing it intentionally, Kale replied. But every time we touch, the bond shares your warmth with me. Saren stared at their joined hands. So that's why you keep touching me. A faint smile appeared on Kale's face. Partly. Saren tilted her head. And the other reason? Kale hesitated. Because I cannot seem to stop myself. Saren looked away, suddenly aware of how close they were sitting. Silence filled the room for a moment. Then Kale spoke again. Tell me about your gift. Saren looked back at him. My gift? The threads, he said. You said you can see them. Saren nodded slowly. My mother had the same ability. Kale listened carefully. She called it the weaving, Saren continued. The threads connect every living soul. They show the paths our lives might take. And you can change them? Kale asked. Saren shook her head. No. I can see them. Sometimes I can touch them. But changing fate is dangerous. Kale studied her thoughtfully. Is that how you knew about the curse? Saren nodded. I saw the dark chains wrapped around your heart. Kale's expression darkened slightly. That curse has controlled my life for 10 years. Saren spoke softly. It doesn't have to control your future. Kale looked down at their hands. I've spent a decade pushing people away, he admitted quietly. Friends, allies, anyone who might care about me. He looked up again. I was afraid the curse would destroy them. Saren squeezed his hand gently. You're not alone anymore. Kale exhaled slowly. For the first time in years, I believe that. Their conversations slowly shifted from strategy to personal stories. Kale spoke about growing up inside the castle walls. He spoke about the expectations of becoming king and the loneliness that came with ruling an entire kingdom. Saren spoke about Thornwood Pack. She described the forest where she had grown up and the quiet life she had once lived beside her brother. Each night their connection deepened. Until finally one evening something changed. Saren stood near the fireplace warming her hands while Kale watched her from across the room. You should be afraid of me, he said suddenly. Saren turned. Why? Because the closer you get to me, the more dangerous the curse becomes. Saren walked toward him. Yet here I am. Kale's voice lowered. You don't understand how much I want you. Saren stopped a few steps away. I do understand. For a moment neither of them moved. Then Kale stepped forward. His control finally broke. He pulled Saren into his arms and kissed her. The kiss was not gentle. It was desperate. Years of loneliness and restraint poured into that single moment. Saren held on to him as the warmth of the bond surged between them. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathing heavily. Kale rested his forehead against hers. This is madness, he whispered. Maybe, Saren replied softly. But it feels right. That night Kale slept peacefully for the first time in 10 years. The next morning the calm inside the castle disappeared. Trumpets sounded across the courtyard as a large group of riders approached the gates of Ironvale Keep. Servants rushed through the halls announcing the arrival of important visitors. Saren watched from a balcony overlooking the courtyard. A group of nobles rode through the gates wearing dark armor and elegant cloaks. At their center rode a woman with long black hair and striking red eyes. Her beauty was impossible to ignore. Who is that? Saren asked quietly. Isolde stood beside her. The maid's face looked uneasy. That is Lady Revina Blackthorn, she said. Saren frowned. Why is she here? There were once plans for her to marry the king, Isolde explained. Saren felt a knot form in her stomach. As the group entered the castle, another figure stepped forward from among the riders. A tall woman dressed in dark robes. Her face remained hidden beneath a deep hood. The witch, Isolde whispered nervously. Saren focused on the strange figure. Her vision shifted as the threads of fate appeared around the courtyard. Every living person was connected by strands of glowing light. But the threads around the witch looked wrong. They were dark, twisted, corrupted. Saren felt a wave of cold fear. The witch's magic was filled with something terrible. Later that day the royal council gathered inside the throne room. Saren stood beside Kale as the nobles argued loudly. Lady Revina stood confidently among them. The witch Morith can cure the king, Revina declared. Corvus nodded in agreement. This alliance will strengthen the kingdom, he said. The council members murmured in support. Finally one of the elder nobles spoke. Your Majesty must marry Lady Rivina once the cure is complete. Cale's eyes flashed with anger. I will not. The room fell silent. You refuse treatment? The noble asked. I refuse to marry someone for political convenience, Cale replied coldly. The council members exchanged worried looks. If you refuse this alliance, the elder noble said slowly, we will have no choice but to question your ability to rule. The threat hung heavily in the air. Saren stepped closer to Cale. She's lying, Saren whispered. Cale glanced down at her. The witch's threads are corrupted, Saren continued quietly. She's not here to cure you. Cale's eyes darkened. Then why is she here? Saren looked across the room at Corvus. To make sure you die. Cale straightened slowly. Then he spoke firmly. I will not marry Lady Rivina. Rivina's smile faded. Then you leave us no choice, she said calmly. The council began whispering again. Saren looked up at Cale. We have to expose them, she said quietly. Cale nodded. 1 month, he said. 1 month before they try to remove me from the throne. Saren met his gaze. Then we have 1 month to prove the truth. And somewhere deep inside Ironvale Keep, Corvus was already preparing his next move. The frame. The days following the council meeting passed with tension hanging over Ironvale Keep. Saren and Cale spent every spare moment in the king's study, trying to understand the web of lies surrounding the throne. Scrolls and letters were spread across the large wooden desk as Cale searched for any sign that could prove Corvus's involvement in the curse. Saren stood beside the tall window, watching the night settle over the castle grounds. We know he's behind it, she said quietly. Cale looked up from the desk. Yes, he replied. But knowing something and proving it are two very different things. Saren turned toward him. The curse didn't grow stronger on its own, she said. Someone has been feeding it. Cale nodded slowly. And Corvus is the only one who benefits from my death. The fire crackled softly in the hearth. Outside the window, the castle courtyard had grown quiet. We'll find proof, Cale said. Saren wanted to believe him. But the threads of fate swirling around the castle had become tangled and dark. Something terrible was moving closer. That night Saren returned to her chamber, exhausted from the long hours of planning. The castle corridors were unusually silent as she walked through them. Most of the servants had already gone to their quarters, and the torches along the walls burned low. She closed the door behind her and sat on the edge of the bed. Her thoughts kept returning to Corvus. The dark thread surrounding him had grown thicker every day. Whatever he was planning, it was coming soon. Saren had barely begun to remove her cloak when a scream echoed through the castle. The sound was sharp and terrified. Saren jumped to her feet. Another scream followed. Then shouting. Saren rushed into the hallway just as several guards ran past her. What happened? She asked. But none of them stopped to answer. Fear tightened in her chest. She followed the sound of voices down the corridor and toward the eastern wing of the castle. A crowd had already gathered outside a large chamber door. Servants whispered in shock. Guards stood in tense silence. Saren pushed through them. Inside the room, the body of the witch Morith lay on the stone floor. Her dark robes were stained with blood. Her throat had been torn open by deep claw marks. And standing beside the body was Cale. His hands were covered in blood. His expression looked stunned. For a moment no one spoke. Then a slow clap echoed through the room. Corvus stepped forward from the doorway. Well, he said calmly. This is unfortunate. Saren felt her stomach drop. Corvus looked at the gathered nobles. Our king appears to have lost control of his wolf. Cale's head snapped toward him. I didn't kill her. But Corvus only shook his head sadly. You were found standing over the body, he said. Covered in blood. The council members murmured nervously. One of the elder nobles stepped forward. Your Majesty, he said carefully, can you explain what happened here? Cale's voice grew tense. I entered the chamber and found her already dead. Corvus gave a quiet laugh. How convenient. Saren stepped forward. This is a trap, she said firmly. Corvus's golden eyes shifted toward her. Ah yes, he said. The Omega. He turned back toward the council. As many of you already know, the king's curse has been worsening. The nobles exchanged uneasy glances. Corvus continued speaking. It seems the madness has finally taken hold. Cale clenched his fists. I am not mad. But the whispers around the room were growing louder. One of the council members raised his voice. If the king truly murdered the witch, then he cannot remain on the throne. Another nodded. The kingdom cannot be ruled by someone who has lost control of his wolf. Corvus looked down sadly. With great regret, I must agree. Saren felt anger rising in her chest. You planned this, she said. Corvus ignored her. The elder noble spoke again. Until the truth can be determined, King Cale Ventress will be removed from power. The decision spread through the room like wildfire. Guards stepped forward. Take him into custody. Several soldiers grabbed Cale's arms. He struggled against them. This is madness, he growled. But they forced him down the corridor. Saren tried to follow. Hands suddenly grabbed her from behind. You're coming with us, a guard said. Saren struggled. I've done nothing. Corvus stepped closer. On the contrary, he said calmly. You drove the king into madness. The guards dragged her away. Within hours, the entire kingdom believed the story. The Omega had corrupted the king. The curse had finally broken his mind. And Corvus had stepped forward to restore order. Saren was thrown into the castle dungeon. The air was cold and damp beneath the mountain. Chains hung from the stone walls, and the faint smell of iron filled the narrow corridor. Saren sat on the hard floor of the cell, listening to the distant sounds of guards moving through the halls above. Somewhere nearby she could feel Cale through the bond. His anger. His frustration. His helplessness. Hours passed. Then the cell door creaked open. Saren looked up. Queen Thessal stood in the doorway holding a small lantern. Her face looked pale but determined. So, she said quietly, my son claims he didn't kill the witch. He didn't, Saren replied. Thessal stepped inside the cell. Then tell me what happened. Saren took a slow breath. Corvus killed her. The queen's eyes narrowed. That's a serious accusation. I can see the threads of fate, Saren said. The witch's magic was corrupted. Thessal remained silent. Saren continued. Corvus has been using dark magic for years. The queen's expression slowly changed. How long? Saren hesitated. Long enough to feed the curse. Thessal's grip tightened around the lantern. Feed it? Saren nodded. The curse on Cale didn't grow stronger by itself. Corvus has been strengthening it. The queen's face grew pale. That would require blood sacrifice. Saren looked directly at her. We believe he sacrificed someone close to the royal family. Thessal froze. My daughter? She whispered. Saren nodded slowly. Lysera. The lantern shook slightly in the queen's hand. For years we believed she died from illness, Thessal said quietly. Saren spoke gently. Corvus found her body. The realization struck the queen like a blade. He murdered her, she whispered. Silence filled the dungeon. Finally Thessal reached into her cloak and pulled out a ring of iron keys. If Corvus truly did this, she said, then he will not take my son's throne. She unlocked the cell door. Saren stepped out. Come, the queen said. They moved quickly through the narrow dungeon corridors. At the end of the hall another cell waited. Cale stood chained to the wall. Silver manacles burned against his wrists. When he saw Saren, his eyes widened. You're alive. Saren rushed forward. The queen unlocked his chains. Cale rubbed his wrists as the metal fell away. Corvus framed you, Saren said. Cale nodded grimly. I suspected as much. Saren looked at him seriously. I've seen the threads of fate. Cale studied her face. In most futures, she continued, we both die. Cale's expression remained calm. But not all of them. Saren nodded. There is one path where we survive. What does that path require? Cale asked. Saren reached for his hand. It requires you to trust me. Cale squeezed her hand firmly. I trust you. Outside the dungeon windows, the first light of dawn began to appear. Above them the castle bells started ringing. The execution had begun. The execution courtyard of Ironvale Keep was already crowded when the morning sun began to rise. Nobles filled the stone balconies that overlooked the square. Warriors stood in long rows beside the courtyard walls. Beyond them, citizens of Valdris gathered in silence, whispering nervously to one another. The air felt heavy with tension. At the center of the courtyard stood a raised wooden platform. 2 prisoners waited there. Saren stood with her hands bound in front of her. Cold iron chains wrapped loosely around her wrists, but she held her head high. Despite the fear spreading through the crowd, her expression remained calm. Across the platform, Cale knelt with his arms restrained by heavy silver chains. The metal burned against his skin, but he showed no sign of pain. His pale eyes remained fixed on Saren. The bond between them pulsed quietly. Corvus stood below the platform wearing dark royal robes. His posture was proud, confident. He raised his hands slowly and the crowd fell silent. "Citizens of Valdris," he announced. His voice carried clearly across the courtyard. "We gather here today to witness justice." Saren watched him carefully. Every thread of fate around him twisted with dark energy. "Our king," Corvus continued, "has fallen victim to the madness of his curse." Murmurs spread through the crowd. "He murdered the witch Morith in a fit of uncontrolled rage," Corvus said. "And the Omega beside him helped drive him into that madness." Saren could feel the crowd's anger growing. Corvus turned toward the platform. "For the safety of the kingdom, both traitors must be executed." The executioner stepped forward. He was a large man holding a long steel blade. Sunlight reflected sharply along its edge. Saren felt Cale's gaze on her. "Trust me," she breathed slowly. The moment was approaching. Before the executioner could move closer, a voice rang out across the courtyard. "Stop." Every head turned toward the balcony above. Queen Thessal stood there. Her silver hair moved gently in the morning wind. "I invoke the ancient right of final testimony," she declared. The crowd stirred again. Corvus's smile tightened slightly. "Of course," he said smoothly. "The king may speak." Cale slowly rose to his feet. The silver chains rattled softly as he straightened his posture. His voice carried through the courtyard. "I did not kill the witch." Silence followed. "I entered her chamber and found her already dead," Cale continued. "The real murderer stands among us." Corvus laughed quietly. "Grief has clouded your mind." Cale's pale eyes locked onto his uncle. "You murdered my sister." Gasps spread across the courtyard. Corvus shook his head. "Your sister died from illness." Cale turned his head toward Saren. It was time. Saren closed her eyes. The world around her faded as she reached deep inside herself. The threads appeared. Thousands of glowing strands stretched across the courtyard, connecting every living soul. The effort to touch them sent sharp pain through her body. But Saren did not stop. She reached for the darkest threads, the ones wrapped tightly around Corvus. Then she pulled. A sudden flash of light burst across the courtyard. The threads became visible to everyone. Gasps and cries filled the air. People stared in shock as glowing strands of fate surrounded them. At the center of the twisting web stood Corvus. Dark tendrils of corrupted magic coiled around his heart like black chains. "No," Corvus hissed. Saren's voice echoed across the courtyard. "These threads show the truth." The crowd watched in horror as another shape appeared beside Corvus. A small girl. Her spirit flickered like pale moonlight. A deep cut marked her throat. Queen Thessal cried out, "Lysera." Saren's voice trembled with effort. "Years ago, Corvus sacrificed the king's sister to fuel his dark magic." The ghost of the child lifted her head slowly. The crowd stared in stunned silence. "She was only 7 years old," Saren said. Corvus stepped backward. "This is a trick," he shouted. But the threads around him continued to glow. Every lie, every secret, every dark ritual. The truth was visible to all. Anger swept through the crowd. Soldiers began stepping away from Corvus. At the edge of the courtyard, Daxon drew his sword. He moved quickly toward the platform. "The king is innocent," he shouted. Other guards followed him. Corvus's face twisted with rage. "You foolish wolves," he snarled. Dark energy suddenly burst from his hands. The magic shot toward Saren like a wave of shadow. Cale shouted her name. But Saren did not move. She allowed the attack to strike her. Pain exploded through her chest as the dark magic slammed into her body. The force knocked her to her knees. But Saren held onto the threads. Through the magic flowing into her, she followed the connection back to its source. Deep inside Corvus's heart, she found the root of the corruption. A mass of ancient darkness. Saren reached for it. With every remaining bit of strength, she pulled. Corvus screamed. The dark magic tore free from his body. Black smoke poured from his chest as the corruption was ripped away. His skin began to wrinkle. His hair turned gray. Within seconds his body aged decades. Corvus collapsed onto the stone ground. The darkness crumbled away. His body turned to dust. Silence fell across the courtyard. At the same moment, something inside Cale shattered. The curse wrapped around his heart dissolved like broken ice. The cold faded from his body. The chains of magic that had held him for years were gone. Cale fell to his knees. The bond between him and Saren flared brightly. Golden light spread through the threads. But Saren could no longer stand. The energy she had used drained the strength from her body. Her vision blurred. She felt Cale rushing toward her. His arms caught her as she collapsed. The last thing Saren saw before darkness took her was Cale's face above hers. Alive. Free. Then everything faded into silence. The queen who accepted rejection. When Saren opened her eyes, the world felt quiet. Soft light filtered through tall windows, casting warm patterns across the room. The air smelled of fresh linen and burning cedar wood from the nearby fireplace. For a moment she did not move. Her body felt heavy, as if she had been sleeping for a very long time. Then she noticed someone sitting beside the bed. Go. He leaned forward in a wooden chair, his elbows resting on his knees. His pale hair looked slightly messy, and dark circles surrounded his eyes as though he had not slept in days. The moment he saw her eyes open, he straightened. "You're awake," he said softly. Saren blinked slowly. "How long?" she asked. 3 days, Cale replied. His voice carried both relief and exhaustion. Saren shifted slightly against the pillows. Her body felt weak, but the cold pain that had once lived inside her chest was gone. "What happened?" she asked. Cale gently took her hand. "You destroyed Corvus's magic," he said. The curse vanished the moment his power died. Saren closed her eyes briefly as the memory returned. The threads. The darkness. The moment she had pulled the magic out of Corvus. "You collapsed after that," Cale continued. "The healer said the power you used almost consumed you." Saren looked at him again. "But I survived." Cale nodded. "The bond saved you." Saren frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" Cale squeezed her hand gently. "For weeks you shared your strength with me without realizing it. When you collapsed, that energy returned through the bond." Saren smiled faintly. "So we saved each other." Cale leaned forward and pressed his forehead against hers. "Yes." A quiet knock sounded at the door. Cale stood as it opened. A tall young man rushed inside. "Saren." Saren's face brightened. "Bram." Her brother hurried to the bedside and wrapped his arms around her carefully. "I thought I lost you," he said. Saren hugged him back. "I'm fine." Bram stepped back and looked toward Cale. The king nodded respectfully. "Your sister saved the kingdom," Cale said. Bram shook his head in amazement. "I knew she was special." Over the following days, Ironvale Keep slowly returned to order. Corvus's supporters were removed from positions of power. Many of them fled the castle when the truth about his dark magic became known. The Royal Council began rebuilding the government under Cale's leadership. Daxon helped restore discipline among the guards. Queen Thessal spent many hours in the castle chapel, finally able to grieve for the daughter she had lost so many years ago. News spread quickly across Valdris. The people learned how the king had been cursed. They learned how Saren had revealed the truth. And they learned how Corvus had destroyed his own life with dark magic. Lady Rivina left the kingdom soon after the truth became public. Her alliance with Corvus had failed, and she no longer had reason to remain in Ironvale. Weeks turned into months. The kingdom slowly healed. Winter faded into early spring. Green leaves returned to the forests surrounding the castle. During that time, Saren regained her strength. The bond between her and Cale grew stronger every day. One evening, Cale stood beside her on the balcony overlooking the castle gardens. The setting sun painted the sky with warm gold and deep red. "I owe you an apology," Cale said quietly. Saren looked at him. "For what?" "For the rejection ceremony," he replied. Saren smiled slightly. "You rejected me in front of the entire kingdom." Cale looked uncomfortable. "I thought it would save your life." Saren laughed softly. "Well, technically it did." Cale frowned. "How?" "You rejected me," Saren said. "And I accepted." Cale blinked in surprise. Saren crossed her arms playfully. "That means I get to decide when the rejection ends." Cale stared at her for a moment. Then he began to laugh. For the first time in many years, the sound carried true happiness. Soon after, the Royal Council announced a new ceremony. This time the Great Hall of Ironvale Keep filled with celebration instead of whispers. Wolves from every part of Valdris returned to witness the event. The same crimson carpet stretched across the stone floor. The obsidian throne stood proudly at the far end of the hall. But everything felt different. Saren stood at the entrance wearing a new gown of silver and gold. Her brother Bram waited proudly among the gathered guests. Daxon stood near the throne with the royal guards. Queen Thessal watched with peaceful eyes. At the end of the carpet stood Cale. He wore the royal cloak of the Alpha King. But the cold that once surrounded him was gone. Warm strength filled the room instead. Saren began walking slowly toward him. This time the crowd did not whisper. They watched with smiles. When Saren reached the platform, Kale took her hands gently. "I once rejected you before this entire kingdom," he said quietly. Saren tilted her head. "And I accepted." Kale smiled. "Then allow me to ask again." He raised his voice so the entire hall could hear. "Saren Voss of Thornwood Pack, will you stand beside me as my true mate and queen of Valdris?" Saren looked around the hall. Then she returned her gaze to Kale. "Yes," she said. The hall erupted in cheers. The ceremony continued with simple vows. They exchanged rings before the gathered wolves. Then came the final bond. Kale gently pulled Saren closer. His teeth brushed against her neck before sinking into the soft skin. The mark of the Alpha King. Saren felt the bond blaze with bright warmth. She returned the mark by biting his shoulder. The connection between them snapped fully into place. The hall filled with the sound of celebration. Saren was now Queen of Valdris. Later that night, Saren stood once more on the castle balcony. Kale stood behind her, his arms wrapped gently around her waist. "What do you see?" he asked softly. Saren closed her eyes. The threads appeared once again. But this time they were bright and calm. "I see the future," she said. Kale smiled. "What kind of future?" Saren looked up at him. "I see 3 children." Kale raised an eyebrow. "3?" Saren laughed. "They have your eyes and my stubbornness." Kale pulled her closer. "And the kingdom?" Saren looked out across the lands of Valdris. The thread stretched far into the distance. "I see peace," she said. "And us." Saren turned toward him. "I see a long life together." Kale kissed her softly. "I spent 10 years believing I would die alone," he said. Saren smiled. "And I spent my life seeing futures that never came true." She took his hand. "But this one will." Below them, the kingdom celebrated late into the night. And above it all stood the Alpha King and the Omega who had once accepted his rejection. Now they ruled together. And their bond was stronger than any curse. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe for more interesting stories.